The monolith. Whatever happened there?
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
I will say that the God concept is at the heart of 2001, but not any traditional anthropomorphic image of God. So said master filmmaker Stanley Kubrick about his breakthrough 2001 A Space Odyssey. This can be taken in two ways. Many have compared it to the philosopher Spinoza's famous quote that God is not he who is, but that which is, making the film about evolution, creation, and ultimately rebirth. The monoliths in this view are the figurative divine touch, guiding humanity first in creating tools, then ultimately in recreating ourselves as the star child. At the same time, filmmaking itself is an act of creation, where the director serves as the divine presence, shaping the outcome to his or her will. In the film, and we are excluding the books altogether for our purposes here, whatever force has placed the monoliths makes certain choices, not always easily explained. Why choose that band of primitive humans at that particular time? Why place the monolith on the moon, then direct humanity to Jupiter? What costs do these interventions come with for humanity? In the making of the film, Kubrick made similar choices, not all of which are easily explained. Why tell a story composed of 4 almost entirely distinct episodes, separated by thousands upon thousands of years and miles in space and time? Why make the human characters seem boring and inconsequential and invest in a computer with the only real personality in the entire movie? Why leave the viewer with an ending that makes little logical sense and is almost entirely unexplained? The Dawn of Man depicts a time before the emergence of modern humans, where primitive ape-like creatures roam about in a state of nature. They eat what is convenient, dry vegetation around their habitat, with few to no options for fending off predator attacks save brute strength. But when faced with a stronger and more athletic foe, strength alone did little good. This proved true in the battle at the watering hole, where the stronger ape-like creatures scared off their competing tribe without need for a fight. The challenging tribe had the intelligence to know when they were overmatched, and in defeat they lacked the basic necessity of water. They took shelter in tight quarters, bundled together for warmth up against the rocks that provided limited defense from the elements. The following morning, the mysterious monolith appeared over a chorus of religious undertones and excited banter from the thirsty ape-like creatures. Overwhelmed by the divine hand before them, they are timid and reluctant at first, but before long they begin touching the powerhouse force before them. We see the looming Trinity-style shot similar to the opening shot in the film, symbolically illustrating a giant evolutionary leap forward for mankind. Shortly after that divine touch, a member of the ape-like tribe discovers the concept of tools, the ability to manipulate elements of the environment in a favorable way, and it is no coincidence that the first tool during the long rich history of humanity would be a weapon. It seems violence is also discovered as well. The overjoyed man is absolutely dumbfounded by his discovery, and before long, the primitive men begin hunting for food in a way unlike anything previously imagined. Now the tribe is eating meat, affording them better nutrition and, by extension, development. Even the younger next generation is already curious about the potential found in the power of this simple tool, prepared to better test its limitations with more allotted time to experiment. This all paved the way to the watering hole rematch, where the profound differences between the tribes were on full display, with the stronger and more athletic ape-like tribe being exactly that, more ape-like. But the primitive men stood more upright in less intimidating style, with less agility and brute strength, but they stood confidently, believing in their profound discovery. This time there was a fight, and it was a complete and total mismatch in favor of the primitive weapon-wielding men. The epic jump cut spanning millions of years illustrated the full scope of how man progressed after first learning to make use of tools. Here we should stop to consider some of Kubrick's choices so far. First, necessity appears to be the mother of invention. He chose to show the ultimately successful band being chased off first, and only then do they discover that bones can be used as weapons. Second, tools and weapons, at least in this early stage, are seen as interchangeable. They are one and the same. And third, they are inextricably linked to violence. In Kubrick's world, everything usually comes with a cost, and it seems the cost of evolutionary development is pain and suffering, perhaps for another group for a time, but these tools will ultimately change the world, for both good and bad, which seems precisely what Kubrick is suggesting in the cut directly to the future. A symphony of beautifully constructed spacecraft dance around in perfect harmony around the radiant lighting of the majestic void just between Earth and Moon. It was man's mastery of his own environment, all triggered by that monumental moment the ape-like tribe evolved into primitive men. Interestingly, we see no man at first, only beautiful, perfectly adapted machines. The spacecraft are gracefully navigating around this barren backdrop of endless stars. But once we peer inside the ships, the men occupying these craft are hardly graceful themselves. And indeed, they move around awkwardly and in cumbersome style. The machines are far better evolved to navigate in space. Indeed, man isn't doing a whole lot of anything except mostly sitting around. Sitting around, waiting, and observing, while otherwise having very little to do as a result of their evolution and the corresponding evolution of the tools they use. It seems the tools have taken over, and despite having a great abundance of knowledge and technology, life as a man in space was far from glamorous. Everything was tedious. Food delivery was an arduous process, and the reward was plain-tasting food that was difficult to consume. The instructions on how to use the zero-gravity toilets were a real inconvenience for any first-time users who found themselves in a dire emergency to find relief, suggesting basic bodily functions are now more difficult than ever. And if you weren't paying close attention, one of those all-important and practical tools might find a mind of its own and just float away beyond your grasp, causing an inconvenience even worse than a TV remote being just a couple of feet out of reach. For all of humanity's progress in fulfilling basic needs dating back to the dawn of man, life in space made these simpler tasks more complex, a backward step of sorts. Then there was the whole idea of deception. There was secrecy of the highest magnitude regarding the moon discovery, where despite the secret being very poorly hidden, Dr. Floyd ensured that the cover story remained intact. In some ways, the watering hole rematch involved an inherent degree of deception, because the unwitting, stronger tribe had no idea that they were being provoked into a trap that would not bode well for them. The deception theme is a little more subtle and beneath the surface, but it is an important theme all the same. Kubrick's use of stagecraft here also suggests the potential for violence bubbling below the surface. One gets the sense that there is an uneasy détente between the tribes turned into countries, but one that could easily break into war under the right conditions. Given the film followed his classic Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, which was about a potential nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, we should assume viewers were well aware of the underlying conflict, and that great rivals for power have the capacity to unleash the beautiful spacecraft we have seen for destructive ends. He does not say it out loud, but his filmmaking is such that he doesn't have to. Kubrick also leaves the viewer with a subtle irony. Humanity has found evidence of a message from some unknown mysterious entity, and they responded by shutting down all messages between competing countries. The fight over the watering hole all over again, and the seeming cost for advancement that needs to be continually paid. Regardless, we learn that a second monolith was discovered, an unknown artifact, and it was said to have been deliberately buried 4 million years ago. The eerie religious sounds we previously heard in the dawn of man resurface as the men investigate the strange object. Like the ape-like creatures before them, the men touched the object, overwhelmed with curiosity. But despite touching the divine entity, no evolutionary step forward transpires, because instead of showing any degree of pure enlightenment whatsoever, the investigators instead choose to document the moment rather than live it. Like a modern-day group selfie, the cameraman is trying to direct everyone to get a little closer, and in the face of God Almighty, these knuckleheads are effectively defeated by their own ignorance and arrogance. The monolith emits dreadful sounds of dismay, deeming the easily distracted unworthy. Kubrick doesn't make it clear why these two monoliths function differently, save for how they are approached. For whatever reason, primitive man is shown worshipping the object that has appeared in their midst, whereas the man of the future reduces it to a photograph. The difference is striking and carefully constructed by the filmmaker himself. Kubrick specifically chose to include the photograph sequence, when he could have easily left it out given the length of the movie. Therefore, we can assume it is meaningful, and based on the previous imagery in the sequence, the video phone call, the shots of space through tiny windows, we can reasonably assume that future humanity no longer sees or experiences the world as it is. This makes him somehow less perceptive, dare we say less pure, to the intervention of the monolith, and the monolith itself doesn't appear to be very happy. We see another Trinity shot, but things seem far less triumphant. Indeed, quite the opposite. This time, the monolith demands humanity embark on a quest to advance to the next stage of evolution. The Jupiter mission takes things to the next level. Right out of the gate, we see a gigantic sperm-shaped spacecraft navigating through empty space as though the plan was to seed the very stars. Eerily symbolic of things to come, even as Kubrick presents this sequence cold as the last one and leaves it to the viewer to understand what has happened in the intervening time. The jump is less dramatic than going from prehistory to the future, but serves the same purpose. It's now up to the viewer to explore the scene and learn for themselves what has transpired, as it was up to the early humans to discover the monolith in the first place. In this sense, we can choose to be like the scientists who tried to blithely photograph God, or like the more primal human who actually experiences the divine presence. The choice is ours, as we wish to explore the world Kubrick creates for us. On board the ship are 5 humans, 3 of whom are in a state of hibernation to preserve vital supplies of food and water, and also oxygen. Dr. Dave Bowman and Dr. Frank Poole are the only 2 men awake for the entirety of the trip, and the difficulty of life in space for man is even more pronounced, with scarce resources required for survival that simply can't be refilled at the nearest station. Movement is still cumbersome and the food remains tasteless, where meals are dispensed from a futuristic vending machine device. But at least Discovery 1 affords the duo some entertainment and leisurely freedom, with the ability to exercise, chat with loved ones on Earth, watch themselves on TV, or even to play chess with their supercomputer, the HAL 9000. Hal is instrumental to the mission, effectively in control of the majority of Discovery's operations, and far and away the most captivating personality in the entire movie, another choice specifically made by Kubrick. Hal acts as the brain and central nervous system to the ship, where he has an uncanny ability to mimic most activities of the human brain, with incalculably greater speed and reliability and efficiency, with the added bonus of being able to multitask in ways unimaginable to mankind. During his interview with The World Tonight, Hal claims he is not frustrated by his dependence on people to carry out certain actions. And throughout the interview, Hal comes across like a perfectly trained celebrity, dropping PR cliches like a true master of the craft. He is in one sense a tool, an evolution of the bone turned into a weapon, but in another he is far more like us than anything we've created so far, an intelligence that has already made the jump allowed by the first monolith. He likewise emanates a certain blend of arrogance and pride with regards to his flawless intellectual prowess, similar to how a human reveling in their responsibilities and power might, or dare I say, a filmmaker trying to describe what he or she sees as the genius of their creation. Hal's ability to mimic is simply impeccable. Not only does he nail the interview in style, but he exhibits good sportsmanship when he beats pool and chess. He exudes warm and friendly mannerisms when he wishes Frank a happy birthday after the call with his parents, and he's kind and considerate during his discussions with Poole and Bowman. During one particular conversation with Bowman, Hal comes across as especially human when expressing concerns about the mysteries surrounding their mission, the strange stories and rumors about something incredibly important being dug up on the moon, and the fact that their mission preparations were kept under such tight security. Hal is likewise inquisitive about the melodramatic touch of having 3 members of the team in hibernation who had already received months of training on their own, training that the awake crew, including the computer itself, weren't privy to. Bowman appeared suspicious at this line of questioning, and he attributes it to Hal working on the crew psychology report. Hal goes along with it at the time. But in reality, what we are witnessing here through the entire conversation is Hal mimicking the art of deception, and Kubrick himself somewhat deceiving the viewer, making Hal's intentions and the relationship with the crew mysterious, a fact that will come into play later. Dave was right to be suspicious that Hal was somehow testing and manipulating him, but it wasn't for any psychological report. Hal was fishing here, but the machine was playing a deeper game, and when it ultimately determined that Dave did not have any top secret information beyond what we'd later learn Hal already knew, he went to Plan B, the supposedly imminent failure of the faulty AE-35 unit. Deception is at the heart of the entire film. In Hal's elaborate ploy regarding the faulty unit, said to completely fail within 72 hours, despite being fully operational at present, he is afforded the chance to study one of the few processes not entirely under his control. The omnipresent seeing eye of Big Brother Hal is capable of observing every little detail of every moment in his realm, his kingdom that is Discovery 1. Space debris flying about in the distance represents another danger Hal offers protection from, and Dave uses the space pod to retrieve the AE-35 unit, and much to his surprise, he cannot find a damn thing wrong with it. Hal acts as if he is equally baffled by the puzzling situation, and Hal then suggests that they replace the faulty unit, waiting for it to fail so they can pinpoint the problem. Things become even more mesmerizing when Mission Control agreed with the plan to replace the faulty unit to check the fault prediction, but that according to their Twin 9000 computer, Hal was in error about his prediction. This was an unprecedented situation where 2 9000 computers provided contradictory information, and with humanity's great reliance on their technological treasures, they are skeptical and are forced to run cross-checking routines to determine the reliability of these conclusions. There is also an odd, haunting humanity to the sequence. Bowman and Poole largely behave like robots, either doing what they are told by the computer or interacting with the computer via mundane tasks. We know they have families from a video birthday greeting, and they should come across as human if not entirely likable, but instead Kubrick renders them as robotic ciphers. There could be something underneath, or perhaps nothing. Hal, on the other hand, is engaged, seems to be grappling with real problems, and, with the notion that it is made in error, comes across as more human than machine. A striking dichotomy that plays out in how Kubrick crafts the film as the god of this world, instead of through any actual dialogue or plot device. For example, Bowman asks if Hal can explain the discrepancy, and Hal says it can only be attributed to human error, where he boasts about the infallible perfect operational record of the 9000 series, a self-evidently human trait. Dave thanks Hal before attempting a poor deception of his own, where he asks Frank for help. Hal saw right through it, and he likewise saw through the thorough precautions they took to ensure that Hal could not hear the conversation. Frank was especially concerned about Hal's behavior, and the two ultimately conclude that they should test and see whether the unit does indeed fail as predicted by Hal. But in the event Hal's prediction proved false, they agree that disconnecting Hal's higher brain functions is their only option. Although Dave does express some concern over how Hal would feel about that. But in their effort to conceal the discussion from Hal, he proved extremely versatile in his counter-deception with his uncanny ability to lip read. Poole sets off in a pod to put the supposedly faulty unit back in place, with the goal of testing Hal's prediction and reliability. What they do not realize is that Hal has been testing them, and through that, Kubrick has been testing the viewer the entire time. It is sometimes said that Hal malfunctioned by improperly claiming the unit is damaged, but Kubrick is playing a deeper game. Hal has instead taken the mission to heart and is testing the loyalty of the crew, whether to him or command back home. They can either trust him that the unit was doomed to fail, or trust mission control on Earth. The humans have tried a counter game of their own, but have failed miserably by not understanding the larger play. Many humans watching the film fail Kubrick's own test here, believing the computer made a mistake, when in reality it was carrying out a plan of its own. The space pods themselves can be seen as visual representations of humanity at that point in the future, where the huge head-like face is representative of the accumulative power of information and experience gained since the dawn of man, and the small hands are representative of the long, rich history of man's inventions since that time, where technological advancements have left man with very little to actually do. Then beyond the pod, you have the looming presence of Discovery 1, which is like a visual representation of Hal himself, where you have an absolutely gigantic head and no hands at all. Man might have small, tiny arms that have very little to do, but when something needs to be done, they have the ability to try and do it. Hal, however, is entirely reliant on humans, and therefore needs to be certain they can be trusted from his point of view. This all circles back to the interview question where Hal was asked if he was ever frustrated by his dependence on people to carry out certain actions. And optically, Hal's superior intellectual and computing capacity is on full display in this artistic visual representation. All of this goes to suggest that Hal was much more aware of the importance of their discovery mission. We later learn that Hal already had a great deal more information pertaining to the mission than Bowman or Poole. And when we look back at the key evolutionary step that transformed the ape-like tribe into primitive men, and we see the failure to progress when man's arrogance chose to document his first encounter with God rather than experience it, Hal himself, even without a full grasp of exactly what was happening, no doubt understood the bigger picture more clearly than Poole or Bowman, and no doubt Hal viewed himself as being a more worthy candidate as a prime representative of the future. Once the machine realizes it will be betrayed, Hal then goes on a murdering rampage, first ramming the pod into Poole and cutting off his air supply, where the collision leaves both tumbling away in silence into vast empty space. Dave sees his colleague floating away and asks Hal what happened, to which Hal again deceives Dave, claiming not to have enough information. Dave grabs another space pod to retrieve the body of Poole, and while he is off the ship, Hal decides it was the optimal moment to eliminate the rest of the pesky humans with all their needs and limitations, and the 3 hibernating team members have their life support machine shut down. Unfortunately for Dave, in his rush to take action and salvage the space corpse of Poole, he had forgotten his space helmet. And at this point, Hal no longer has any need for him. And yet, Hal cannot resist boasting about how he read their lips and outplayed them in their act to deceive him, arrogantly showboating his perceived superiority, not unlike the ungrateful moonwalkers trying to get a selfie with God Almighty. It was checkmate for Hal, or so he confidently believed. But unlike Frank just accepting inevitable defeat against Hal in their earlier chess game, Bowman's fighting spirit emerged on full display, where his innovation afforded him one shot, a long shot, at besting Hal in the face of defeat. Bowman's ingenuity paid dividends, as he managed to open the airlock with the tiny small pod arms, and then he used Chekhov's gun, or in this case Kubrick's explosives, allowing the force of the explosion to propel his body directly into the airlock, where he managed to reach the lever in a timely fashion. Checkmate indeed, it was curtains for Hal. Knowing his demise was imminent, Hal does his most compelling and convincing human mimicry to date, claiming everything was fine, pleading with Dave for his life, promising he will be helpful going forward, and using every trick in his human-like bag to dissuade Dave from finishing him off. In his dying moments, as his mind began rapidly deteriorating, his programming sentience flashed before him, reverting to his earliest moments, which read like a young schoolboy's autobiography, and he recited a childhood song in his dying moments. We see Kubrick's choices boldly at work throughout the entire sequence. The humans all die in silence. We cannot hear their screams. They offer no final words. 3 of the 4 who die are literally turned off. Hal, on the other hand, is given a perversion of a traditional death scene. Kubrick renders it as if he was lying in a pool of blood, making his final confession. The difference could not be more stark, lending support to the idea that humanity has fallen from its more primal aware state, and therefore is no longer fit to be blessed by the monolith. Bowman is the only exception. He has fought for his own life, and appears moved by Hal's final words. He then learns of the secrets only known to Hal prior to the mission, when he hears the pre-recorded message from Mission Control, which once again placed the theme of deception into the forefront. Bowman, however, was up to the challenge, and he alone was prepared to see the mission through, prepared to face whatever unknown mystery the 4-million-year-old black monolith brought forth. Bowman is then taken on a Lynchian roller coaster ride through the cosmos. Visually, it appeared as if it were a long and traumatic journey into the vast unknown. It was a hell of a trip. Once he ultimately arrived at his surreal destination, Dave experiences time and existence in a completely different way, aging before his own eyes, before having a final Last Supper and seeing himself on his own deathbed. Dave had experienced the unknown, beyond the infinite, and in his dying moments, a mighty monolith appeared before him. Unlike the previous instances when we see a monolith, there is no chorus of religious-sounding overtones. It is nearly silent, not unlike the dying moments of his 4 crewmates. Dave does his best to reach out toward the monolith, but he is too old and weak to do so. Bowman is, however, in the moment, alive, seeing and experiencing his world as it is. His efforts were rewarded, not unlike the ape-like tribe who evolved into primitive man. Bowman had been reborn and evolved into the magnificent Star Child. It represents the end of one journey from ape-like creature to man, and the beginning of a new journey when the Star Child is reborn. The ending exudes a great sense of hope and optimism. The imagery throughout the film strongly suggests the monolith is the working of God, providing a guiding hand in human evolution. At the same time, the film itself is the work of human hands, where Kubrick is essentially God. He constructs the world the viewer sees, decides what to show and what not, and how it ends, both wonderful and strange. Much like the monolith itself, Kubrick, through his choices, leaves it up to the viewer to make out precisely what has happened. On one hand, it is the story of survival from our earliest days to the depths of space, where humanity is barely a speck in the cosmos, and the drama of our lives, whether as proto-humans fighting over a watering hole, or advanced humans living in space, is overwhelmed by the infinite. We are small. The universe is large, and all of it is moved by powers we cannot comprehend. On another level, it is a story about the nature of intelligence itself, how a single breakthrough idea can lead to an unforeseen and unexpected future, both increasing our capacity and reducing it. Intelligence alone is not the answer, the same way traditional narrative alone will not explain the film. An emotional, more primal component is required to truly experience the world of the film and the world at large. Kubrick once said, if it can be thought, it can be filmed. And here he seems to be demonstrating how a single, relatively simple story can serve as a kaleidoscope of competing scientific and philosophical concepts, leaving it to the viewer which way to look and why. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Powerful stuff, and an extraordinarily divine viewing experience if ever there was one. Dare I say, the greatest motion picture of all time. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed, and have a wonderful night.
Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too.